G'day ZiggyD here. GGG recently released a huge 3-part manifesto on balance changes coming in the next expansion. Here's a hyper summary. Part 1 focused on Flasks and Ailment Mitigation. The reception overall was very good to this one. Options for dealing with ailments in PoE got mega buffed. Purity of Elements now gives immunity to all elemental ailments, though it costs 50%. Steel Skin gives immune to bleeding during its effect. Tempest Shield is now an aura and gives immunity to shock. Utility Flasks now give ailment immunity during their effect, and no longer need reactive use. The drawback is reduced flask duration. Life and mana flasks are still reactive, so you use them after an ailment is put on you, but they now give up to 17 seconds of immunity, a pretty solid payoff. Consecrated Ground gives 50% curse effect reduction, new passive clusters and a new keystone that makes intelligence not scale energy shield but instead reduces ailment duration on you. Pantheon Powers got some pretty serious buffs and changes, make sure you check them in game next patch, but the highlights are that Brine King upgrade now gives Cannot Be Frozen straight up, Arakali got debuffs expire 20% faster amongst some other buffs, Ralakesh makes bleed deal no extra damage while moving. Item modifiers and crafts that deal with ailments got buffed and are much more powerful options, jewels too. This stuff seems super good. It'll be pretty easy to get near or full immunity to a couple of the worst ailments and heavily reduce or manage the others on pretty much all builds now with a combo of the new improved tools. Utility Flask durations got buffed across the board, which counteracts the immunity modifier duration penalties somewhat, or it lets you have better flask uptime. Flasks now have more tiers of the same mods that get stronger at higher levels. While it won't be mandatory, you can now get flasks from high-level maps to craft stronger than leveling or early game ones. The downside is a lot of new mods at high levels is going to make rolling the right flasks with alterations pretty damn hard. Expect to roll and sell flasks you don't need until you get what you want, or buy them off other players for a pretty good chunk of currency. Most players will probably only worry about getting a couple of high-level flasks as a longer-term investment. Life flasks that heal over time had their durations halved. This means that they heal twice as fast. This is some pretty good shit and should close the gap on instant and healing over time setups. I played a Pathfinder last season with good flask investment and petrified blood, and heal over time was insanely good. Twice as good as that seems pretty damn insane. Flask passives and the like get buffed in a few places, but especially Ranger for life and mana recovery. Part 1, pretty good stuff overall. Only concern is crafting high level flasks sounds kind of painful, but it does give another thing to chase. Part 2 of the manifesto dealt with character defenses and recovery. This one was pretty wild. Armor's pretty good now. Lots more of it on gear, and determination gives flat armor. And the base calculation for the effective armor got basically doubled. The example is that you used to need 50,000 armor to half the damage taken from a 5,000 damage hit. Now you only need 25,000 armor, half as much, to do the same thing. To help armor characters survive elemental damage, there will be more maximum elemental resist nodes on the armor side of the passive tree. Evasion also got a huge buff and is much more available. 75% evade against a tier 16 monster used to take 49,000 evasion, and it now only takes 24,200, about half as much. Grace also gives 20% more evasion rating now too. Dodge doesn't exist anymore. Yep, it's completely gone. Basically, the idea is that evading and dodging is all just one thing now, the buffed evasion. But since spell dodge is also gone, and evasion doesn't help against that, there is a new way to deal with spell damage for evasive builds, spell suppression. Spell suppression is a chance to have half the spell damage taken, and it can be stacked up to 100%. You can get it on passives and gear with bigger amounts available on body armor and shields. Compared to spell dodge, you'll still take damage, but you can get 100% and hopefully survive the smaller hits comfortably, without the risks that the spell dodge cap gave you of getting hit for full damage. As such, phase acrobatics is gone, and the acrobatics keystone now converts spell suppression into spell dodge, kind of like a reverse glancing blow. Acrobatics will be the only source of spell dodge now. To help buff base defenses, armor and evasion gear can now drop with 0 to 10% additional armor or evasion, kind of like a hidden bonus quality that cannot be modified. Energy shield items instead range from 0 to 20% additional ES. This one's a weird change as it means sometimes a random Val Regalia will always be worse than another random Val Regalia, and significantly so. I'm not sure I like this idea much, but it does on average mean more core defense on our gear. Energy Shield Recharge has gotten a big buff to be more competitive with other forms of recovery. Recharge speed as a base is now higher, 33% instead of 20%. Wicked Ward no longer penalizes leech or regen, but slows recharge speed, bringing it in line with the previous 20% speed. New affixes on gear can also give a lot of faster start of Energy Shield Recharge. Overall, Recharge seems like a solid option again, and can be more easily combined with other recovery options for ES builds. Ghost Dance, the node from Trickster, is now a keystone that everyone can get, making hybrid energy shield evasion a more enticing option outside of Trickster. Trickster will be getting changed in some way as a result. Armor Energy Shield Hybrid also gets a new similar keystone that gives energy shield regen when hit based on the physical damage prevented to encourage hybrid armor ES stacking. Life regen on gear is getting buffed to help with damage over time effects, and the shadow area of the tree gets a new keystone, lots of new keystones, this time called Lethe Shade, that makes you take 75% less damage over time for the first second, but it makes ailments last 100% longer on you. It seems like a pretty good option to give you time to remove the ailment or step out of a degen. Versatile Combatant, the node from Gladiator, is being moved to the tree in a weaker form as a keystone to give everyone more options for block stacking, and block sources are getting some buffs as well. Gladiator's block tree will be getting reworked as a result. Blind now only helps characters with evasion, so disregard it as an option for your Templar and such. As a result, Flesh and Stone is now cheaper at 25% mana. Fortify now scales its effect based on the damage dealt with the attack, so it should be pretty garbage for spellcasters now, I imagine, and mainly used for its role as a buff to melee defense. Overall, Part 2 seemed pretty good, though I felt there was a little bit of a gap in defensive buffs for life-based spellcasters. I'm glad ES Recharge seems to be coming back, and like to see buffs to hybrid defensive setups as well, though there wasn't anything special for armor evasion in there. It's hard to say how evasive characters will pan out post-changes. Dodge stacking was very good, but the new stuff seems quite good too, so it's a little bit hard to tell at the moment. Part 3 of the Manifesto deals with auras, curses, and elemental damage over time. That last part seems to be the source of some contention as people are running the numbers and are a bit concerned about damage over time builds. Aura bot power level has been a concern for a long time, and this patch brings a significant change. Reduced reservation as a stat has been replaced with reservation efficiency. 100% efficiency halves the reservation of an aura, for example making a 50% aura a 25% one. This means that if you want to run 3 50% auras, for example, you'll need 100% efficiency. The net result here, put simply, is that it's much harder to stack tons of auras now due to diminishing returns on efficiency, while it should be a bit easier for regular builds to fit in an extra aura or two with less investment. Further, aura effect has been changed from medium cluster jewels, where there was a lot of it available, to small cluster jewels, and it's now more focused on buffing individual auras rather than all of them. As such, focused investment in 1 or 2 auras is solid, but aura bot stacking is heavily nerfed. Curses get a similar treatment, with curse effect being moved to small cluster jewels and focusing scaling on individual curses rather than global curse scaling. You can still stack curses, but will have to select which ones of them you want to scale. At a guess, it looks like support characters will probably still be a thing, using a combination of carefully selected auras and curses to buff their party, but they'll be significantly weaker than before, it seems. And now elemental damage over time, which has been the source of some contention in the community as people make their calculations. Ignite's base calculation was heavily buffed. It used to deal 50% of base damage over 4 seconds. It's now 125% of base damage over 4 seconds. As a result, most damage over time and ailment scaling on skills has been removed. For example, Fireball no longer deals 88% more damage with Ignite. Things that still need this mechanic, due to charging up for example, such as Flame Blast, still have some but in reduced amounts. Damage over time skills have also had their base damage over time heavily buffed. For example, Cold Snap going from 1200 cold damage over time to 1900 cold damage over time. The intention is to make damage over time much less reliant on skill multipliers and allow a more diverse selection of skills for Ignite. The calculations from these changes GGG puts forth are huge buffs, with things like Flame Blast dealing 75% more Ignite damage and Firestorm doing something like 150% more damage. However, there is a bit more to the picture. Elemental Overload is now only granted to the skill that dealt the crit. So you must crit with Flame Blast to get Elemental Overload's damage buff for it, and can no longer use something like Stormbrand or another skill to activate it. For some skills, this won't matter too much. For others, you may need some crit scaling, and for some slow hitting skills or pure damage over time skills like Scorching Ray, Elemental Overload is no longer an option. Elemental Equilibrium, the keystone, also gets a huge change. It's moved to the Ranger area, and now grants a 25% exposure effect instead of lowering resists by 50%. 25% exposure is strong, but this means it cannot be stacked with other sources of exposure, and it's also a lot weaker. Now, these changes are both reasonable because often something like 60% of the total damage of dot builds was based on these two keystones alone, meaning you always had to get them and everything was balanced around them. And as such, I think this change is all well and good, but the question people are asking at the moment is whether the previous, admittedly huge buffs are actually enough to cover the amount of damage lost from Overload and Equilibrium. Right now, it seems like in some cases, elemental dot skills are actually losing some damage, so the buffs may not be enough, or these skills may be too reliant on newly buffed gear modifiers to reach solid power levels. The good news is that there is still more news and info to come, and GGG seem keen to get feedback on these proposed changes now and adjust things as we get closer to launch. On the whole, I've loved to see these manifestos from GGG. Their formatting and level of communication is a new all-time great for this community. And we're getting a lot more time with the major balance changes before the reveal, where we'll be able to instead focus on the new content. But let me know what you think in the comments below. That's it for now, I'm Ziggy D, and thanks for watching.